Imagine experiencing a moment so painful, like so deeply humiliating, that it just defines your entire childhood.
Right, a moment where you're completely powerless.
Exactly, you are completely powerless. But now, imagine taking the exact mechanics of that trauma, dismantling them, and kind of reverse engineering the pieces to build a global empire.
An empire built on essentially ending human suffering.
Yeah, which is wild. Like, how does someone engineer that kind of psychological pivot?
Yeah.
How do you take the worst thing that ever happened to you and turn it into, your ultimate competitive advantage?
It is a profound question, honestly, because it completely defies our standard understanding of trauma.
Right.
We usually view extreme childhood distress as this permanent deficit, right? Like a shadow you spend your whole life trying to outrun. But the psychological architecture we are examining today suggests the exact opposite.
It flips it on its head.
It really does. It suggests that if you understand the actual mechanics of human behavior, that shadow can become your primary fuel source.
And that is exactly what we are decoding today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are jumping into this massive interview source, detailing the life and the incredibly specific psychological frameworks of business and life strategist Tony Robbins.
Yes, and the material here is incredibly dense.
It is. Our mission today is to map out his childhood survival patterns, explore the biological and psychological benefits of leaning into severe stress, navigate what he calls the 4 seasons of human development, and ultimately hand you the actual keys for achieving personal mastery.
Which is the ultimate goal here.
Right. We aren't just reading a biography today. Think of this as a toolkit for your own life. We want to extract the exact mechanics of how to rewire your reality.
I'm glad you used the word mechanics because we really need to emphasize that.
Oh, absolutely.
While Robbins is famous globally for these, high-energy, stadium-filling events, the underlying architecture of his mindset is rigorously analytical.
Yeah, it's not just jumping up and down.
Not at all. We are looking at a framework rooted in pattern recognition, cognitive reframing, and this almost clinical mastery of human physiology. I mean, he advises billionaires, hedge fund managers, heads of state.
Right, you don't get in those rooms just by hyping people up.
Exactly. You don't maintain a seat in those rooms just by being motivational. You get there and you stay there by understanding the invisible mechanical forces that drive human behavior.
Well, to understand the tools he built, we really have to look at the fire that forged them, right? We have to look at his environment growing up.
Because this wasn't theoretical psychology for him.
No, this was absolute baseline survival.
The source material paints a very clear picture of an environment defined by extreme volatility. He grew up in poverty, living in a rough, kind of lower middle class section of an otherwise affluent area.
Yeah, which is its own kind of psychological pressure cooker.
Definitely. And he experienced massive instability in his family structure.
Yeah.
He had 4 different fathers cycling in and out of his life. 4. But the true epicenter of his psychological conditioning was his relationship with his mother.
And the way he describes her is intensely complex, like there's a lot of love there.
Oh, clearly.
He acknowledges she pushed him and wanted him to succeed, but she was also bearing this just unimaginable burden of stress, and she possessed 0 tools to handle it.
Right, and without those tools, she turned to self-medication. The source notes she was mixing alcohol with prescription drugs.
Which is a highly combustible combination.
Incredibly volatile. And this chemical alteration frequently led to severe, violent outbursts. Robbins, as a young boy, took the brunt of that physical and emotional violence.
It was just heartbreaking to think about.
It is. So if we look at this through an evolutionary or developmental lens, you have to ask yourself, what happens to a child's brain when their primary caregiver is also their primary source of danger?
Well, your brain's only goal is to keep you alive.
Right.
So you have to become an absolute master at predicting the danger. You can't just react. You have to see it coming before it arrives.
Precisely. You develop hypervigilance. But he took it a step further. He didn't just learn to hide. He learned to manage her emotional state to protect himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was forced to become an expert in reading micro-expressions, breathing patterns, muscle tension, vocal tonality.
Like a human lie detector.
Essentially, yes. He had to calculate in a split second whether a shift in her posture meant an impending explosion or just, a bad mood.
He was reverse engineering human emotion before he even hit puberty.
Exactly.
It's like he was getting a PhD in human psychology, but the tuition was constant terror.
That is the exact mechanism. The hypervigilance required to survive an abusive, chemically altered parent is the foundational mechanism he later refined.
Into his ability to read a room, right?
Yes. This extraordinary ability to read the physiological state of a CEO, an athlete, or a stadium of 15,000 people. He learned to read the invisible weather in a room because failing to do so as a child meant physical pain.
Man, that generalized hypervigilance, that constant scanning of the environment, it was put to the ultimate test on one specific afternoon.
Yes, the Thanksgiving story.
Yeah, there is an event in the source material that serves as the absolute crucible for his entire philosophy.
It really is the defining moment. Everything he teaches radiates outward from this single afternoon.
Okay, let's put you, the listener, right in the middle of this room. It is Thanksgiving Day. The family has zero money. The father who adopted him had just lost his job.
So the stress is already at a peak.
Exactly. There is no turkey, there are no side dishes. They are sitting in the house with literally nothing but a jar of peanut butter and some crackers.
Just a bleak situation.
Very. The parents are screaming at each other through a closed door. The tension is suffocating, and it is the lowest possible point this family has reached. And then, out of nowhere, there is a knock at the front door.
A completely unexpected variable introduces itself into this highly pressurized, closed system.
Right. So young Tony goes to the door, he opens it, and standing there is a tall stranger. The man is holding two massive grocery bags, one in each hand, overflowing with food.
Yeah.
And resting by his feet is a roasting pan with a massive uncooked turkey. The stranger asks for the father. Tony runs to get him. The father comes to the door, and this is where we witness a psychological car crash.
That's a great way to describe it.
We see two entirely different human realities collide in the exact same physical space.
It is the most perfect, stark illustration of how our internal cognitive frameworks dictate our external reality.
Right. So the father takes one look at the man, the groceries, and the turkey. Before the stranger can even get a full sentence out, the father's face contorts in rage.
Instant anger.
He says, "We don't take charity." And he violently slams the door. But the stranger was leaning forward, so the door physically bounces off his shoulder.
Which just fuels the fire.
Oh, it makes the dad even more furious. The stranger calmly says, "Sir, somebody knows you're having a tough time. They just want your family to have a nice Thanksgiving. I'm just the delivery guy."
Trying to de-escalate.
But the father screams, "We don't take charity," and slams the door a second time. This time, it hits the guy's foot and pops open again.
Notice the physical escalation here.
Yeah.
The father's internal state, his massive, fragile ego, is dictating his physical environment. He is choosing conflict over sustenance.
And Tony is just standing in the hallway watching this play out, completely stunned.
Taking all this data in.
Right. Finally, the stranger looks right into the father's eyes and says something profound. He says, "Sir, don't make your family suffer because of your ego."
Oh.
Robbins describes how he could literally see the veins pumping in his dad's neck, but that sentence breaks him. The father drops his shoulders, angrily snatches the bags of groceries, slams them onto the table, and aggressively slams the door shut without uttering a single word of thanks.
The contrast in this moment is the linchpin of everything.
Yeah.
The father is enraged. He is emasculated, furious, and deeply resentful. But if you look at young Tony in that exact same moment, he is ecstatic.
To him, this isn't an insult, this is salvation.
Exactly. It's the exact same door, the exact same turkey, the exact same stranger, but the father and the son are living in two totally different universes.
And this brings us directly into the core mechanics of the source material. Robbins uses this Thanksgiving story to demonstrate a concept he calls the three decisions.
Yes.
He argues that every human being is making three distinct neurological and psychological decisions in every single moment of their lives. And these run on a continuous loop, right? Mostly unconsciously.
Completely unconsciously for most people, yes.
I want to break these down slowly because this is where the toolkit for the listener really begins. The first decision is, what are you going to focus on? And the premise here is that human beings are fundamentally distortion and deletion creatures.
That is a critical psychological truth.
Break that down for us.
Well, at any given millisecond, your senses are being bombarded by millions of bits of data. Temperature, light, sound, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, the hum of the refrigerator.
Right, it's too much.
Way too much. Your brain simply cannot process all of it, so it deletes almost everything and distorts the rest to fit whatever narrative keeps you safe. You do not experience reality. You experience the highly curated sliver of reality that you focus on.
Okay, so applying that to Thanksgiving, the father's brain deleted the food.
Yes.
He literally didn't even process the calories sitting in front of him.
What?
His focus was entirely narrowed in on the fact that he had failed to provide. He focused on his own inadequacy.
Exactly.
But Tony's brain deleted the bruised ego. Tony's focus zeroed in entirely on the abundance of the food.
Which triggers the second decision, and this is where the real power lies. Decision 2 is, what does this mean?
Right.
The split second you focus on a piece of data, your brain scrambles to assign meaning to it. It has to contextualize it for survival. Is this a threat? Is this an opportunity? Is this the end or the beginning?
And the meaning you assign equals the emotion you feel, right?
Instantly.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Emotion is just the physiological manifestation of meaning. The father assigned the grocery delivery the meaning of worthlessness.
Yeah.
He interpreted the stranger's presence as a public spotlight, eliminating his failure as a man. The source notes that he muttered about how worthless he was for hours afterward.
Because he assigned the meaning of failure, his body produced the emotions of anger, shame, and bitter resentment.
But Tony, standing 3 feet away, assigned a radically different meaning. His meaning was stranger's care.
Wow.
He looked at this anonymous delivery and decided it meant that out in the world, people who didn't even want credit cared enough to protect a family they didn't know. That meaning produced profound awe, relief, and gratitude.
And out of that emotion, you arrive at the third and final decision, which is, what am I going to do?
Yes, emotion drives action.
If you feel shame and anger, what do? You sulk. You lash out, which is exactly what the father did. He sat in his anger, eventually leaving the family entirely. But Tony, operating out of the emotion of awe and gratitude, took a completely different action. His action was a lifelong commitment. He decided, if strangers care about me, I am going to care about strangers. Someday, I am going to do this for others.
And he executed on that immediately. Like, the source details how by the time he was 17, with barely any money to his name, he went to a local grocery store manager, talked him into a 10% discount, and bought enough groceries to feed 2 families.
Amazing.
He dressed up as a delivery guy himself. He wrote a note in English and Spanish saying, "This is a gift from a friend someday. Pay it forward."
The exact same pattern.
Exactly. When he delivered it, Owen grabbed his face, crying, calling it a gift from God. The next year, he fed 4 families. The year after that, 8. Eventually, he built a massive company, got his employees involved, and fed 1 million people. Then 2 million.
It just scales up exponentially.
Recently, his organization set a goal to provide 1 billion meals in the U.S. And globally, his initiatives are now involved in providing tens of billions of meals. This entire global supply chain of philanthropy, literally altering the survival of millions of humans, was born because one kid chose a different meaning for a frozen turkey than his father did.
It's the ultimate proof of concept.
Yeah.
The external event, the arrival of the turkey, did not dictate his destiny. The mechanics of his internal processing dictated his destiny. The meaning he assigned created his reality.
Okay, I have to step in here and push back on this because it sounds incredibly inspiring, but also, a little too neat.
Okay, let's
It's like you're saying we are all just wearing different colored lenses looking at the exact same painting. One guy wears blue lenses and sees a cold, depressing tragedy. The other wears rose lenses and sees a warm, beautiful comedy. It's the same canvas.
Yes.
But realistically, for you listening right now, if you are in the middle of a massive crisis, say you just got fired, you can't pay rent, your partner just walked out on you, how hard is it neurologically to just choose a better lens? I mean, you can't just slap a happy sticker on a tragedy and pretend you're fine. That sounds borderline delusional.
That is the most common and valid critique of cognitive reframing, and it's a vital distinction to make. Robbins is absolutely not advocating for toxic positivity or delusion.
Okay, so what is the difference?
He isn't saying you ignore the reality of a lost job or a broken heart. What he's highlighting is the plasticity of your neural pathways. Is it hard to change the lens? Yes. It requires an agonizing amount of conscious effort at first.
Because our default setting is negative, right?
Yeah.
We are wired to look for the tiger in the bushes, not the pretty flowers.
Exactly. The brain's default state in a crisis is threat detection. It wants to find what's missing, what's dangerous, what's ruined. That is what the father did. His default conditioning pulled him instantly to the threat to his ego. Shifting that focus requires you to manually interrupt your own automated biological response. You have to force your prefrontal cortex to override the amygdala and ask, what else could this possibly mean? What is the utility in this? The realization that you are, in fact, wearing lenses is the only way you can ever take them off.
So to you, the listener, think about the last time you got hit with a truly bad event, a real gut punch. What was the immediate automatic meaning your brain assigned to it?
Usually something disempowering.
Yeah. Did you assign a meaning that made you the victim of a chaotic universe? Like, I'm cursed, nothing works out for me.
Right.
What if, purely as an experiment in mechanics, you forced yourself to assign a meaning that empowered you?
Right.
This happened to clear the deck for something better.
Right.
If you change the meaning, you change the emotion. If you change the emotion, you change the action.
And that deliberate friction, the struggle of forcing a new meaning onto a painful event, is the perfect bridge into understanding his entire philosophy on stress.
Yes, let's talk about stress.
Because Robbins didn't just survive his chaotic childhood, he actively utilized the friction of it to build his capacity.
And this is a major paradigm shift for most people. We spend an enormous amount of time, energy, and money trying to curate a stress-free existence. We want the quiet life, the easy job, the smooth relationship.
Of course we do.
And Robbins basically says that this is a fool's errand. You cannot avoid extreme stress.
The source material is unequivocal on this point. Robbins argues that extreme distress is an absolute, unavoidable inevitability. It doesn't matter how wealthy you become, how isolated you make your life, how perfectly you manage your diet, or how spiritual you are.
It's coming for you.
Severe trauma, loss, and extreme distress are coming for you multiple times throughout your lifespan.
It's the weather. You can't turn off the rain.
Precisely. So if the goal of avoiding stress is biologically and practically impossible, you have to adopt a different goal entirely. You have to transition from being a manager of your circumstances to a creator through your circumstances.
Oh, I like that.
You have to learn how to let stress use you for growth, rather than letting it break you down.
He has this great quote, "If you're going through hell, keep going." Which, yes, sounds like something on a motivational poster, but the source breaks down the actual, tangible, psychological dividends you earn if you push through that hell.
There are 3 specific benefits to enduring extreme distress.
Let's analyze the mechanics of those 3 benefits.
Yeah.
The first dividend is discovering your true strength.
Yes. Human beings generally live within a very narrow, artificially constructed band of comfort. We go to the same places, talk to the same people, handle the same baseline problems. Because of this, we think we know our limits. We think if X happened, I would completely fall apart.
But extreme distress obliterates that artificial boundary.
Exactly. When everything is stripped away and you are forced into survival mode, you discover a reservoir of resilience that you simply cannot access during times of peace. You find out who you actually are beneath the layers of social conditioning. It forces an expansion of your self-concept.
It's the old idea that pressure makes diamonds. But if you spend your whole life avoiding the pressure, you just stay a lump of coal. You never get to see what you could have been.
Very true.
So what's the second benefit?
The second benefit is the discovery of true friends. Extreme crisis acts as the ultimate ruthless filtering mechanism for your social environment.
This one is so brutal, but so true. When things are going great, when you have the title, the money, the status, everyone wants to be in your orbit. You have 100 friends.
Naturally.
But the day you lose everything, the day you hit absolute rock bottom and you have nothing to offer them, watch how fast that room empties out.
It is incredibly painful in the moment because it shatters your illusions about your social safety net. But structurally, it is a massive gift. Distress burns away the superficial, transactional relationships.
It cleans house.
The people who stay, the people who walk into the mess when everyone else is running out, those are the foundational relationships. You emerge from the stress with a hyper-curated, bulletproof social circle.
Which brings us to the third benefit, and honestly, this is the one that blew my mind the most. Stress inoculation.
This is a robust concept in psychology. The premise is that surviving massive trauma doesn't just leave a scar if processed correctly. It actually builds a psychological immune system against future stressors.
It fundamentally changes your baseline for what constitutes a problem.
Yes. The story Robbins uses in the source to illustrate this is staggering. He talks about his relationship with a man named Captain Coffee.
Let's dive into Captain Coffee. This man was a military pilot, a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he wasn't just a POW. He spent 7 years in solitary confinement in a North Vietnamese prison camp.
Unbelievable.
7 years.
Alone.
Enduring unimaginable physical and psychological torture.
The deprivation he experienced is almost beyond our comprehension. Now, fast forward many years later, Captain Coffee is back in the United States, living his life, and he gets targeted by the IRS for a brutally unfair, highly aggressive audit.
And this isn't a quick thing, right?
No, the government drags this audit out for 3 agonizing years.
For a normal person, a 3-year IRS audit is apocalyptic. It ruins marriages, it causes heart attacks, it completely consumes your every waking thought. The anxiety of the government coming after your livelihood is paralyzing.
Absolute nightmare.
So Robbins is talking to Captain Coffee during this audit, and he asks him, "Doesn't this drive you crazy? How are you so calm?"
And Captain Coffee's response encapsulates the entire concept of stress inoculation. He looks at Robbins and says, "Tony, after being with the North Vietnamese, what could the IRS possibly do to me?"
I mean, it's just an unbelievable perspective shift.
Look at the mechanics of it. The external reality of the IRS audit has not changed. It is still a bureaucratic nightmare threatening his finances. But Captain Coffee's capacity to process stress has been exponentially expanded by his past trauma.
Right.
The threshold for what triggers a panic response in his nervous system has been raised so incredibly high by those 7 years in a box that everyday civilian stressors, even extreme ones like an audit, barely register as a blip on his radar. He has been inoculated.
So, if stress expands our capacity, how does that translate into everyday motivation? The source goes deep into how we drive ourselves forward, making a very sharp distinction between 2 types of motivation, push versus pull.
This distinction is crucial for understanding why so many high achievers eventually burn out. Robbins describes push motivation as the application of willpower. It's you consciously forcing yourself to execute a task you know you should do, but don't necessarily want to do.
Like, I have to hit this sales quota.
I have to force myself to go to the gym. I have to stay awake and finish this report.
It's you trying to push a boulder up a hill. And willpower is basically a battery, right? It's heavily dependent on your glucose levels, your sleep, your mood. It has a definitive limit.
Exactly. Push motivation requires immense, constant cognitive load. It burns an enormous amount of neurological energy, and eventually the battery depletes. You hit a wall.
Yeah.
But then there's pull motivation.
Pull motivation is when you stop pushing the boulder and instead you find a gravitational force that just pulls you up the hill.
Pull motivation occurs when you attach yourself to a mission or a purpose that is significantly larger than your own immediate comfort. You aren't forcing yourself to wake up early. The urgency of the mission is literally pulling you out of bed.
It's a magnetic, expansive force.
Robbins argues that there is virtually no limit to pull motivation. When you are serving something you care about more than yourself, you tap into an energetic reserve that doesn't deplete the same way willpower does.
And this leads to one of his most controversial points in the material. He takes aim directly at modern culture, specifically what we might call the self-care revolution.
Yes, he does.
He argues that obsessively focusing on yourself, constantly monitoring your own boundaries and your own micro-feelings, actually makes you psychologically weaker and more fragile over time.
It definitely runs counter to the prevailing modern narrative, but if you look at the cognitive mechanisms he's describing, the logic holds up. He posits that the human mind, left to its own devices, is an inherently reductionist survival machine.
What does that mean in this context?
If you spend all your time deeply analyzing your own internal state, evaluating your own happiness, tracking your own anxieties, hyper-fixating on your own comfort, your mind will always find a flaw.
Oh, wow.
It will always find a reason why you aren't perfectly content. You trap yourself in an endless, paralyzing feedback loop of self-diagnosis.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because I know people listening are thinking this. Wait, is he saying that taking a mental health day is bad? Are bubble baths making us weak?
Not at all.
Are we supposed to just grind ourselves into dust in the service of others and completely ignore our own bodies? Because that sounds like a fast track to a nervous breakdown.
It's a valid pushback, but it misinterprets his definition of service.
Yeah.
He is absolutely not anti-recovery. In fact, as we will see later, he has one of the most intense, highly curated physical recovery routines on the planet.
Right.
What he is warning against is making your own emotional comfort the absolute center of your universe. When you shift your focus to serving others, when you engage that pull motivation, you actively escape the claustrophobia of your own reductionist mind.
You're getting out of your own head.
Exactly. You aren't sitting alone in a room evaluating whether you feel 100% perfectly content today because you are too busy actively engaged in easing the real suffering of someone else. Paradoxically, alleviating the suffering of others is the most reliable way to alleviate the neurotic suffering of the self.
It's like staring at a tiny speck on a wall until it looks like a massive hole versus turning around and looking at the whole landscape. Serving others forces you to look at the landscape.
Precisely. And this understanding of our internal drivers transitions perfectly into how we navigate the external world. Because if our internal stress and our daily external crises are the unpredictable weather of our lives, Robbins insists we also have to understand the broader climate we are operating in.
Right. You can't just react to today's rainstorm. You need to know if it's monsoon season. This is where he introduces the concept of the 4 seasons of human development. And I love the historical analogy he uses to set this up.
It's a brilliant example of macro pattern recognition. Think back to early human history. Before human beings conceptually understood the physical seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, they lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers in a state of constant, pervasive, existential fear.
Yeah, they had no idea what was going on.
They had no idea why it suddenly got cold, or why the food sources vanished, or if the warmth would ever return. They were entirely reactive to an environment that felt chaotic and hostile.
But then someone zoomed out and recognized the pattern. Wait a minute, the cold always follows the harvest. The warmth always returns after the freeze. Spring means you plant seeds. Summer means you tend the crops in the heat. Fall means you reap what you grew. Winter means you survive on what you stored.
Once that pattern was recognized, the existential fear was largely eliminated. The environment was still harsh, but it was no longer unpredictable. That simple pattern recognition allowed for the birth of agriculture and, consequently, human civilization.
Robbins takes that exact same macro pattern and overlays it onto the human lifespan. He argues that we all go through 4 distinct, predictable seasons of development, and knowing which season you are currently in fundamentally changes how you process the friction and stress of your life.
Let's map out these 4 personal seasons, because understanding the underlying mechanics of each stage is incredibly validating. We begin with springtime, which spans roughly from birth to age 21.
So spring is childhood and adolescence. What are the characteristics of this season? Is it just a free ride?
It is characterized by rapid, almost explosive growth, and it is largely supported by the external environment. Think of a seed in the spring soil. In this phase of life, you are generally taken care of by existing structures, parents, schools, societal safety nets.
You're just absorbing.
Exactly. Massive amounts of information are pouring into your brain, and you are acting as a sponge. The challenges of spring are fundamental learning to walk, talk, socialize, and form a baseline identity. But the environment is usually explicitly designed to support that growth.
Yeah.
You aren't expected to yield a crop yet, you're just expected to grow.
But then you graduate, you hit 21 or 22, and boom, you cross the threshold into summertime, ages 22 to roughly 42. And man, summer is intense. This is where the illusion of the easy life shatters.
Summer is notoriously the most arduous, frustrating, and exhausting season of the human lifespan. It is the ultimate testing period. You are out of the protective greenhouse of spring, and you are thrust out into the blazing heat.
You're sweating.
You have to sweat. You are grinding to establish a career, struggling to find a partner, trying to build a financial foundation, perhaps raising young children yourself.
And cognitively, it's a period of massive friction. He notes that summer is when you start rigorously questioning the bullshit, his word, that you were taught in spring.
Yes, it is a period of intense disillusionment. You look at the beliefs you inherited from your parents, your teachers, or your religion, and the harsh realities of the real world force you to ask, is this actually true, or was this just a comforting story?
You're testing everything.
You experience the friction of dismantling your inherited worldview and forging a worldview that has actually been tested by reality.
So to you, the listener, think about your exact age right now. Are you in your late 20s or 30s? Are you in the sweaty, frustrating, grinding, testing period of summer? Because if you are 30 years old and you feel like life is incredibly hard, you're exhausted and nothing is coming easy, Robbins is giving you a massive reframe. It's supposed to be hard.
Exactly.
You aren't failing at life. You are just in summer. You are tending the crops in the scorching heat. If you understand the season, you stop taking the heat so personally.
Which is absolutely necessary, because the labor of summer dictates the yield of the next season. From ages 43 to 63, you transition into fall or autumn. This is the season of reaping.
He calls this the power period. This is where it all pays off.
If executed correctly, yes. If you planted the right seeds in your spring, and if you endured the heat and worked relentlessly during your summer, fall is where you experience massive exponential leverage.
Okay, what does that leverage look like?
By your mid-40s and 50s, you have accumulated a vast network of relationships. You possess deep industry knowledge, you have resources, and most importantly, you have strategic elegance. You know how the game is actually played.
You're not just throwing stuff at the wall anymore.
Exactly. You can accomplish more with a 5-minute phone call in your fall than you could working 80-hour weeks in your summer. Statistically, this is the season where individuals hold the most influence, earn the most money, and have the most choices.
But, and this is a big but, there's a massive, terrifying warning label attached to this season of fall. The harvest is not guaranteed. Robbins says if you didn't plant in the spring or if you didn't work in the summer, you will weep in the fall, not reap in the fall.
That is the cruel reality of the pattern. If you reach 50 years old and you spent your 20s and 30s avoiding hard work, avoiding friction, and failing to build skills or resilience, fall becomes a season of deep, often inescapable regret.
Ouch.
You don't have the leverage, and you don't have the energy to go back and do the summer labor over again.
It's a sobering thought. And finally, from roughly age 64 to 104 and beyond, you enter winter.
Robbins notes in the source that he has just crossed into the season himself as he is turning 66. He reframes winter not as a time of decay, but as the season of true, authentic leadership.
How does he define leadership in that stage?
In winter, the frantic ambition of summer and the leveraging of fall have subsided. You know exactly who you are. You have zero interest in proving your worth to anyone else because your ego has been tempered by time.
It sounds incredibly peaceful.
It can be. If you have maintained your physical health, which is critical, and if you have cultivated deep, meaningful relationships over the previous decades, he argues that winter is the most profoundly fulfilling season of all. You wake up every day with a profound sense of gratitude, knowing that every day is a gift. You become a mentor, passing the harvest down to those currently sweating in their summer.
But here is where this framework goes from being a cool personal assessment to a really complex, multi-dimensional chess game.
Yeah.
Our personal seasons do not operate in a vacuum, do they?
Not at all.
We're navigating our individual timelines, while the world itself is navigating its own massive historical seasons.
This is a fascinating layer of complexity. Robbins heavily references a seminal sociological book called Generations, authored by Strauss and Howe.
Which, I love this historical footnote he famously saw sitting on the desks of both President Bill Clinton and Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich on the exact same day.
Two complete political opposites.
Two men who were completely opposed politically, engaged in brutal partisan warfare, were both secretly reading the exact same playbook on historical cycles to try and predict the future.
It speaks to the absolute power of the pattern. The premise of Generations is that society and history also move through predictable 4-part cycles, or turnings, roughly every 80 to 100 years. A high, which is spring, an awakening, which is summer, an unraveling, fall, and a crisis, winter.
So I have to ask you, how does that overlap work? What happens to an individual if the world is going through a massive, chaotic, historical winter, like a global depression, a world war, a massive pandemic? But personally, biologically, they are in their spring or summer.
That intersection of the macro and the micro dictates the unique psychological flavor of an entire generation. Let's say your personal springtime, your formative childhood years, happens during a historical fall or spring, a time when the economy is booming, institutions are trusted, and peace is prevalent.
Like the post-WWII boom.
Exactly. You are going to grow up with a baseline assumption that the world is safe and abundant.
You might even grow up thinking you're a genius and that success is easy just because you have the wind at your back.
Exactly. But conversely, if your personal summer, your vital testing and building period in your 20s and 30s collides with a historical winter, your experience will be radically different.
So you're dealing with all the personal stress while the world is on fire.
Right. You are trying to establish a career, buy a home, and build a family while the economy is collapsing, institutions are failing, or a war is raging. You are going to face extraordinary, crushing headwinds. Your summer will require vastly more resilience than someone who experienced summer during a historical spring.
So synthesizing all of this, why does knowing this actually help us?
Because knowing your season prevents panic. When you understand the intersection of your personal season and the historical cycle, you stop taking the friction so personally. If you are struggling in your 30s during a recession, you aren't a failure. You are simply navigating summer during a historical winter.
It is structurally designed to be difficult.
Yes. If you understand it's winter, you don't put on a swimsuit, walk outside, and scream at the sky because it's snowing. You put on a heavy coat, you build a fire, you conserve your resources, and you patiently prepare for the inevitable historical spring that always, mathematically, follows the freeze. It removes the existential terror because it frames chaos as a predictable, manageable cycle.
Which bridges us perfectly into the final and most actionable section of this deep dive. The keys to personal mastery. Because identifying that it's winter or knowing you are in your summer is just the diagnostic phase. Okay, I know the weather. Now, how do I actually execute? How do I achieve what he calls the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment?
Robbins argues that in a world of rapidly accelerating change, especially with the looming omnipresence of AI, which they discuss as a major disruptor in the source, the ultimate, irreplaceable competitive advantage is the speed of your learning.
How fast you can adapt.
If you can absorb, adapt, and learn faster than your competition, you win, regardless of what the technology does.
And he breaks this down into 3 specific skills that he actively teaches his own children. Let's walk through these. The first skill is pattern recognition.
We have touched on this heavily with the seasonal cycles. Fear, in almost all human endeavors, is born from the illusion of unprecedented chaos. We panic when we think, this exact thing has never happened in the history of the world and I have no idea what to do.
Right.
Pattern recognition destroys that illusion. When you rigorously study history, psychology, financial markets, or human biology, you quickly realize that almost nothing is truly unprecedented. It is almost always just a rhyming iteration of a past cycle. A market crash, a political upheaval, a shift in consumer behavior. It's happened before.
And once you see the pattern, the fear goes away.
When you recognize the pattern, the fear dissipates because the unknown becomes known.
But recognizing it isn't enough, which leads to skill number 2, pattern utilization.
Correct. It is utterly useless to see a pattern if you don't act on it. Pattern utilization is execution. You see a subtle shift in consumer behavior, you notice a new technological capability, or you spot an inefficiency in a market, and you position yourself to catch the wave before the masses even realize the water is moving.
You're anticipating.
This is the defining characteristic of a great entrepreneur or a visionary investor. They don't just observe the weather, they build windmills.
And then there is the final, highest level skill. Skill number 3, pattern creation. This is how you don't just succeed, but how you become the GOAT, the greatest of all time, in whatever field you choose.
Pattern creation is the synthesis of everything you've learned to generate something entirely novel. The source uses a brilliant analogy here involving Tom Brady.
Oh, let's unpack the Brady analogy because it perfectly illustrates this evolution. When Tom Brady entered the NFL, he started with pattern recognition. He studied the existing patterns of what made a great quarterback. He recognized how defenses moved, how coverages worked.
Right, the fundamentals.
Then he utilized those patterns. He executed the existing playbook better than anyone else. He won Super Bowls by mastering the current standard.
But to achieve unprecedented longevity, to play at a championship level into his mid-40s in a violently destructive sport, mastering the old patterns wasn't enough. He had to become a pattern creator.
He had to invent a new way to play.
He synthesized his knowledge of biology, nutrition, biomechanics, and throwing mechanics to invent entirely new physical recovery regimens, the TB12 method that the league had never seen before. He created new ways to read defenses that didn't exist in the standard coaching manuals. You take all the inputs you've absorbed over your summer and fall, and you forge them into an entirely new paradigm.
But here is the massive, glaring roadblock that Robbins identifies, and it's the critical pivot in his entire methodology. Most people know what they should do.
Oh, absolutely.
They recognize the pattern. They know the strategy. They know they should eat less sugar. They know they should invest a portion of their income. They know they shouldn't yell at their spouse. The how-to is rarely a mystery, yet year after year, they fail to change. Why?
Because they attempt to tackle change in the completely wrong biological and psychological order.
This right here is the absolute core of the deep dive. This is the toolkit, the 3 steps to a breakthrough.
Robbins argues that when a human being decides they want to change an aspect of their life, they almost invariably start by looking for a strategy. They look for the diet plan, the financial spreadsheet, the communication script.
And strategies are good.
And to be clear, a good strategy is invaluable. Learning a proven strategy from an expert can save you a decade of painful trial and error.
Having the greatest strategy in the world is completely useless if you have a toxic story.
Exactly. The story is the internal narrative you tell yourself about your identity and your capabilities. It is your deeply ingrained belief system. If your internal story is, I just have bad genetics, I can never lose weight, or I'm just not a numbers person, I'll never be wealthy, or all the good partners are taken, I'm destined to be alone, then it fundamentally does not matter if I hand you the most perfect, scientifically validated strategy on earth.
Let's just ruin it.
Your subconscious mind will actively sabotage the strategy to ensure it aligns with your story. The brain craves consistency above all else. Belief is the invisible architect of your reality.
Okay, so you have to change the story. But you can't just stand in front of a mirror and wish a deeply held belief away, right? Like, I am wealthy. I am wealthy. If you don't believe it, your brain rejects it. Robbins says that your story is entirely dictated by your state.
This is the neurological linchpin. Your state is your immediate physical and emotional condition in a given moment. It is the cocktail of hormones in your blood, your posture, your breathing rate, your level of fatigue. Your physiology dictates your psychology.
The source uses this incredible analogy to explain how these three interact. The vault analogy.
Imagine you are standing in front of a massive, impenetrable bank vault. Inside that vault is the change you desperately want to make. Having the right strategy but the wrong state is like possessing the exact correct numbers to the vault's combination lock but entering them in the wrong order. You have the right data, but the mechanical tumblers will not align. The vault simply will not open. You cannot execute a high-level complex strategy when your nervous system is in a low-level state of exhaustion, fear, or depressive lethargy.
I want to relate this to everyday life because I think everyone listening does this constantly. It's the concept of chunking. Let's say you know you need to go to the gym. That's the strategy.
Good strategy.
But when you are sitting on your couch, feeling tired, so a low state, you don't think of going to the gym as one action. Your brain chunks the activity into 29,000 agonizing micro steps. You think, ugh, I have to find my shoes, they're probably upstairs. Then I have to drive in traffic. Then I have to find parking. Then I have to change in a cold locker room. Then I have to wipe someone else's sweat off a machine. Then I have to shower, dry my hair, drive back.
The list goes on and on.
Suddenly, working out feels like climbing Everest. It feels impossible. But eating a bag of chips, your brain chunks that into one easy step. Open bag, eat.
That is a perfect explanation of the cognitive load associated with chunking. From a neurological perspective, working memory can only hold so many variables at once. When you are in a depleted physiological state, when you are tired, stressed, or underslept, your brain is trying to conserve metabolic energy.
It's trying to save you.
Therefore, it views any complex task as a massive threat to its energy reserves. So it highlights every single microstep as an insurmountable obstacle. It creates a terrible, overwhelming story, like, this is too hard, I don't have time, to justify staying on the couch.
Whoa.
It is not a lack of strategy, you know how to lift a dumbbell. It is a terrible story fueled by a low-energy state.
Which is exactly why Robbins is so utterly obsessive, almost fanatical, about controlling his physical state. He doesn't wait to feel motivated, he forces his biology to create the motivation.
Exactly.
The source details his daily morning routine, which sounds like absolute medieval torture to most people, but it is deeply biologically calculated.
It is the ultimate pattern interrupt. For 18 years, every single morning without fail, he completely submerges his body in a freezing cold plunge pool. The water is often 50 degrees or colder.
And the most crucial detail he shares isn't about the physical health benefits. Yes, cold plunges cause vasoconstriction, they spike dopamine, they reduce inflammation, that's all well-documented science. But he says he does it primarily for the psychological discipline.
Exactly. He explicitly states that he never, ever negotiates with himself. He doesn't walk out to the pool, stand on the edge, dip his toe in and think, wow, it's really freezing today, maybe I'll just do 30 seconds or maybe I'll skip it. The absolute microsecond he arrives at the water, he dives entirely under.
Zero hesitation.
Zero. Why? Because it is a daily visceral training mechanism for his nervous system. He is teaching his brain that his conscious mind is the undisputed master of his physical body. When his mind says go, the body obeys instantly, regardless of comfort.
It's a radical biological override.
Yeah.
Think about what happens when you hit that freezing water. You trigger the mammalian dive reflex. Your body dumps massive amounts of norepinephrine and adrenaline into your bloodstream. You're literally shocking your nervous system out of whatever sluggish, groggy, or pessimistic story you woke up with. You force a physiological peak state.
And by the time he steps out of that freezing water a few minutes later, his biology has radically altered his psychology. He is wide awake, his neurochemistry is optimized, and he is in a state of absolute certainty and high energy. From that peak state, he automatically generates an empowering story about what he can accomplish that day. And with that story, he is perfectly positioned to execute complex, demanding strategies.
He does the exact same thing before he walks out on stage too. The source notes he has this intense pre-stage ritual. He uses a mini trampoline, he does explosive rhythmic breathing exercises to hyperoxygenate his blood, he makes massive aggressive physical movements, and he anchors it all with a prayer of contribution, shifting into pull motivation. Use me, Lord, let me serve these people.
He's winding himself up.
He actively pushes his physical state to a 20 out of 10. He does this because when he steps out in front of an arena of 15,000 exhausted, skeptical people, a relaxed level 9 for him still hits the audience like a tidal wave of energy. He never starts with material to strategy. He always starts with the state.
If we synthesize the overarching architectural theme of this entire deep dive, it comes down to a radical, almost aggressive reclamation of personal agency. It is an acknowledgement of our limits paired with an absolute mastery of what is within our control. We cannot control the external environment. Robbins could not control the volatile, traumatic, dangerous nature of his childhood home. We cannot control the inevitable extreme distress that will crash into our lives, whether it's an IRS audit, a physical illness, or the loss of a loved one. And we certainly cannot control the shifting macroeconomic seasons or the historical winters we must navigate.
We don't control the weather. We don't control the X-ray.
Precisely. But we have absolute, ultimate, programmable control over 3 specific internal mechanisms. We control the meaning we assign to the chaos, whether the frozen turkey means we are worthless, or whether it means strangers care. We control the physical and emotional state. We force our bodies into choosing to plunge into the cold rather than negotiating with our own fear and fatigue. And we control the patterns we choose to recognize, utilize, and create, rather than remaining the passive victims of our circumstances.
So as we wrap up, I'm going to turn this right to you, the listener. I want you to think about the single biggest problem in your life right now. The exact thing that is keeping you awake at 2 a.m. The relationship issue, the career roadblock, the financial stress. You're currently attacking that massive problem by obsessing over the strategy, trying to figure out the perfect step-by-step solution while your physical state is completely exhausted and your internal story is pessimistic and defeated?
If so, you are trying to open the vault with the wrong combination.
Exactly. So what would happen if, before you try to solve that problem tomorrow morning, you forced your body into a peak physical state first? Go for a dead sprint. Do intense breath work. Take a freezing cold shower without hesitating. Force the physiology to override the psychology. Then ask yourself what season of life you are actually in. Give yourself some grace if you're in the summer heat. Change the state, rewrite the story, and watch how quickly the strategy reveals itself.
It is the ultimate shift from being a manager of your circumstances to a creator of your reality.
But I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on after you take your headphones off. We've spent this entire time talking about how to master your own internal state and navigate your own seasons. But what happens when you collide with someone who isn't just a passive part of your environment, but an active antagonist? What happens when you encounter a malignant boss, a highly toxic partner, or a deeply manipulative friend whose entire subconscious goal is to actively disrupt and dismantle your meticulously cultivated state? How do these tools of self-mastery hold up when the weather isn't just cold, but is actively trying to break into your house? That's a completely different kind of winter and requires an entirely different kind of boundary. Think about how your state holds up under a direct attack. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.